And we end the show with a tit-for-tat diplomacy move from Ghana. The country has deported 3 Israeli nationals who landed in Accra on Wednesday. They say they've been compelled to retaliate over what Israel started. Ghanaian authorities have stated this move is a direct response to the alleged mistreatment of Ghanaian travellers in Tel Aviv. Earlier this month, 7 Ghanaians were detained at Israel's Ben Gurion airport. 4 of them were staff from the parliament.
What looks like a routine deportation in Ghana is quietly shaking assumptions about power, privilege, and diplomacy. When Ghana sent Israeli nationals home, it wasn't acting out of hostility, it was asserting something far more consequential. This moment signals a deeper shift in how African states now see themselves, not as junior partners, not as silent hosts, but as sovereign equals ready to enforce their laws without apology.
When Ghana moved to deport a group of Israeli nationals, the official explanation was straightforward. Immigration rules had been violated, and the law would take its course. Yet the political meaning of the action went far beyond the language of visas, permits, or administrative compliance. In a global system where power often determines whose citizens face consequences and whose do not, Ghana's decision landed as a deliberate signal. It suggested that African states are increasingly prepared to enforce their sovereignty without hesitation, even when doing so affects citizens of countries that have long enjoyed diplomatic goodwill and strategic influence on the continent. According to Ghanaian authorities, the deportations followed established legal procedures, rooted in domestic immigration law and framed as a routine enforcement measure. Officials emphasized that the individuals involved failed to meet the country's legal requirements for entry or stay, and that Ghana, like any sovereign state, reserves the right to determine who is permitted within its borders. On paper, nothing about the action was extraordinary. States deport foreign nationals every day, and immigration enforcement is a basic function of governance. What made this case different was not the legal justification, but the political context in which it occurred and the message it conveyed. For decades, African states have often been expected to exercise caution when dealing with countries perceived as diplomatically powerful or strategically valuable. Enforcement of rules has sometimes been flexible, especially when the individuals involved came from states with strong security ties, economic leverage, or symbolic weight in international politics. Against that backdrop, Ghana's refusal to quietly look the other way was interpreted by many observers as intentional. It was a reminder that sovereignty is not selective, and that the dignity of the state applies equally to all foreign nationals, regardless of passport. This moment fits into a broader pattern unfolding across the continent. African diplomacy is increasingly shaped by assertiveness rather than accommodation. Governments are more willing to challenge unequal treatment, respond publicly to perceived disrespect, and recalibrate relationships that once operated on assumptions of hierarchy. From trade negotiations to military partnerships and diplomatic disputes, African states are signaling that engagement must be based on reciprocity rather than gratitude. Ghana's action sits squarely within this evolving mindset. What makes the deportation particularly notable is the historical relationship between Ghana and Israel. The two have shared decades of diplomatic engagement, cooperation in areas such as agriculture and technology, and periodic alignment in international forums. Ghana has often been viewed as a pragmatic partner, careful to balance its regional leadership role with a reputation for stability and openness. For that reason, the decision to enforce immigration law so visibly against Israeli nationals stood out. It disrupted expectations that friendly relations automatically translate into leniency. In many parts of the world, close bilateral ties can quietly shield foreign nationals from the full weight of local enforcement. Issues are resolved behind closed doors, misunderstandings smoothed over diplomatically, and incidents kept out of public view. Ghana chose a different path. By allowing the deportations to proceed and defending them publicly, the state made clear that friendship does not supersede law. This was not a rupture of relations, but a recalibration of terms. The symbolism is hard to miss. In the global imagination, African states have often been portrayed as rule takers rather than rule makers, cautious actors navigating an international system shaped elsewhere. Actions like this challenge that narrative. They demonstrate a willingness to assert control over domestic affairs without fear of diplomatic backlash. Ghana did not issue apologies, nor did it frame the decision as an unfortunate necessity. Instead, it presented the enforcement as normal, lawful, and justified. This reflects a broader shift away from automatic deference to powerful states. Deference has historically been reinforced by aid dependencies, security cooperation, and diplomatic pressure. Yet as African economies diversify and political confidence grows, the calculus is changing. States are less inclined to compromise core principles for the sake of external approval. The emphasis is moving toward equality in international engagement, where respect is mutual and rules apply universally. For Israel, the incident carries implications beyond the immediate diplomatic exchange. In recent years, Israel has sought to deepen ties across Africa, emphasizing shared security concerns, technological cooperation, and political alignment. This outreach has often relied on the assumption that historical goodwill and strategic offerings would translate into favorable treatment. Ghana's action challenges that assumption. It suggests that African partners are increasingly evaluating relationships on pragmatic terms, with less tolerance for perceived imbalance or entitlement. This does not mean that Israel-Africa relations are headed for rupture. On the contrary, the episode may encourage a more mature and balanced engagement. Relationships grounded in mutual respect tend to be more durable than those built on asymmetry. Ghana's message was not hostile, it was clarifying. It underscored that cooperation does not imply exemption, and that respect for local laws is a baseline expectation, not a negotiable detail. Regionally, the deportation may resonate with other African governments facing similar dilemmas. Leaders across the continent regularly navigate tensions between enforcing domestic rules and managing external relationships. Ghana's example demonstrates that it is possible to do both without provoking crisis. By acting decisively and communicating clearly, the state avoided escalation while reinforcing its authority. That model may prove instructive for others seeking to assert sovereignty without theatrics. The timing of the incident also matters. Africa is in the midst of redefining its global position, driven by demographic growth, economic potential, and strategic relevance. As competition for influence intensifies among external powers, African states are recognizing their leverage. They are no longer passive arenas for rivalry, but active participants shaping the terms of engagement. Decisions like Ghana's deportation of Israeli nationals reflect this growing confidence. At its core, the message from Accra was simple: mutual respect is non-negotiable. Reciprocity is expected, not requested. Equal treatment under the law is the foundation of any genuine partnership. These principles resonate deeply in societies that have long experienced unequal power dynamics on the global stage. Enforcing them, even in small but visible ways, carries symbolic weight. Critically, Ghana's move avoided the pitfalls of sensationalism. There were no inflammatory statements, no public grandstanding, no attempt to frame the incident as ideological confrontation. The strength of the action lay in its normalcy. By treating the case as routine, Ghana normalized the idea that African sovereignty does not require justification. It exists by default, and it applies universally. The implications extend beyond Ghana and Israel. For the United States and other external actors engaged across Africa, the lesson is clear. Relationships built on assumptions of special status are increasingly out of step with contemporary African diplomacy. Governments expect engagement to be grounded in equality, transparency, and respect for local institutions. Deviations from these expectations are more likely to be met with enforcement than accommodation. For African citizens, the episode carries its own significance. It reinforces the idea that the state is willing to defend its authority and, by extension, the dignity of its people. In a world where citizens often feel that foreign interests override domestic priorities, such actions can strengthen public confidence in governance. They signal that sovereignty is not merely symbolic, but actively exercised. Ultimately, the deportation of Israeli nationals from Ghana was not about hostility or isolation. It was about boundaries. It marked a moment where law, dignity, and self-respect took precedence over convenience. In doing so, Ghana contributed to a broader narrative of African self-assertion, one defined not by confrontation but by clarity. As global power dynamics continue to evolve, moments like this will likely become more common. African states are increasingly aware of their agency and less willing to subordinate it to outdated hierarchies. Ghana's decision stands as a reminder that sovereignty, once claimed, must be practiced. And in practicing it openly and calmly, Ghana sent a message that reached far beyond its borders. The era of automatic deference is fading, replaced by partnerships grounded in mutual respect and equal standing.